The air was thick with an oppressive dampness as Emily stepped through the old iron gate, its hinges screeching a hollow welcome that made the hairs on her neck rise. The moon hung low, casting long, jagged shadows across the overgrown yard of the abandoned house. Its silhouette loomed like a dark sentinel against the black sky, windows shattered, the porch sagging under years of neglect. The place had been empty for decades, or so they said. But Emily had heard the rumors. A cold wind whispered through the skeletal trees, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, clawing at the thick fog that rolled in from the forest. Every step she took, her boots crunching on the gravel path, felt as if it were being watched. Her breath formed visible clouds in the air, and despite the chill, a bead of sweat trickled down her spine. There had been no reason to come here, but the dare, the stories, they had pushed her. The haunted house, the one no one dared speak about. The house where people had disappeared. Her hand trembled as she reached the door, which creaked open without resistance, revealing a dark hallway. The smell of rot hit her nose, musty, like old paper and wet earth. The door slammed shut behind her with a force that made her jump. She froze, heart pounding, listening to the silence. A cold gust rushed past her, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight. She took a step forward, then another. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness stretching and curling, thickening like smoke. As she ventured deeper into the house, a soft, distant sound reached her ears. A rhythmic thump like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate. But it wasn't her heart. She turned the corner into the living room, where moth-eaten curtains fluttered against the windowless panes. The room was cluttered with dust-covered furniture, chairs overturned as if they had been abandoned in haste. A broken chandelier hung from the ceiling like a twisted spider's web, the crystals reflecting nothing but shadow. The heartbeat grew louder. Suddenly, a door slammed open at the far end of the room. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively backed away. The wind had stopped. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating. The heartbeat now reverberated in her bones, each pulse sending shivers through her body. From the dark doorway, something emerged, a figure, barely visible in the dim light, but it was tall, its limbs unnaturally long. A shadow that wasn't quite a shadow. The floor creaked loudly beneath Emily's feet, and she gasped, her foot slipping. Before she could regain her balance, the figure lurched forward, its ragged breath rasping through the still air. Her heart raced in terror, the sound pounding in her ears. She tried to move, but her legs were frozen. The figure came closer, its face still hidden by the darkness, but she could feel its eyes on her, cold, unblinking, unfeeling. Then, in a split second, it lunged. The door behind her burst open again, and a loud, guttural scream echoed through the house. Emily's chest tightened as she spun around, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was a man who was unmistakably dead. His face was pale and bloated, eyes sunken and hollow, and his clothes hung from his emaciated frame. His mouth opened in a soundless scream, his hand reaching out toward her. With a jolt, Emily snapped her gaze back to the shadowy figure. It was gone. Gone? She dared a glance over her shoulder, and that's when she heard it. A whisper. "You shouldn't have come." The whisper came from everywhere, and nowhere at once. Her blood ran cold. She turned to run, but before she could take another step, the ground beneath her feet seemed to twist and shift. The walls pressed in tighter, and the air became thick and suffocating. The heartbeat was deafening now, thumping in her chest, making it impossible to think. Then she felt it, a cold hand gripping her wrist from behind. With a jolt, she spun around and screamed, but there was nothing there. And yet, the whisper was still there, inside her head, taunting her. Run! Run before it's too late! A faint scratching noise broke through the quiet. It was coming from the ceiling. Emily glanced up, and in the darkness above, the shape of a woman, hanging upside down, her hair a tangled mass, her eyes empty black pits. Run! The word echoed, and then silence. All at once, everything went dark. The next morning, the house stood still, quiet, and empty, just like before. No one would ever know that Emily had been there. The wind swept over the yard, and the gate creaked open on its own,